The New York Giants finally won a game in convincing fashion, 45-33 over the Indianapolis Colts, but they also lost ground in the race for the first overall draft pick. We're going to take a look at the game notables, the draft situation, and did this win help save head coach Brian Dable's job? All of that's coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And to my Blue Crew community members, it was just awesome getting a chance to hang out with you guys on the Discord channel. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I was able to pop in here and there, and I enjoyed it. And I look forward to doing that with you again next week if y'all are interested in it. Anyway, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, that's right, folks. Finally, we have a win. The New York Giants defeating the Indianapolis Colts 45-33. First time since week 16 in 2019. The Giants have scored over 40 points, so it's been a long time. The win also snapping a 10-game losing streak. The Giants avoid going absolutely winless at home, which they were on the verge of doing for the first time since 1974. So a lot of good things. Now, with this win, for what it's worth, now I always say a win is a win and a loss is a loss. At one point, the Giants had a 21-6 lead over the Indianapolis Colts. That was in the second quarter, and gradually the game developed into a classic scoring shootout. The Giants never once giving up the lead, which is good. But more importantly, folks, the Giants showed what it looks like. They reminded us what they could do when they clean up the mistakes, they pay attention to the little details, and they get solid quarterback play. And they got all that today. They got great quarterback play from Drew Lock, who just, watching him, dare I say, he looked like the competent quarterback that they believed he could be. The offensive line was fantastic. They didn't allow a single sack, and I think they only gave up one hit, a total of 5 pressures, the 5 pressures per Pro Football Focus. That's what they had down. The Giants won the turnover battle. Folks, before we go any further, let me just remind you, the Colts were playing for a postseason berth. Now, they needed to win to keep their postseason hopes alive. So by not doing that, they're out. So I don't want to hear anybody tell me, oh, well, the Colts stink. No, they were playing for a postseason berth. The Giants, they had nothing to play for other than, draft position, which we'll get to in a moment. So, for those of you who were saying all along that the Giants were tanking, and I kept telling you guys they're not tanking, that they're just that bad. Folks, if this doesn't convince you, then I don't know what will. Because this Giant team was not tanking. They're just bad. They just had some bad strings of football. Today happened to be a good one for them, and it paid off. Now, there were things, obviously, that you would have liked to have seen a little bit better. It wasn't a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. For instance, the running game, the Giants' running game, they averaged 2.7 yards per carry. They ran the ball 30 times, only 80 yards, and half of those yards, by the way, came on one run, that by Tyrone Tracy Jr. Right? So that wasn't exactly a positive. You look at the total yardage. The Giants had 389 yards, which was pretty high total considering that they've been averaging somewhere in the 200s. The Colts had 446, but still the Giants, they ended up averaging 7.3 yards per play to the Colts' 6.1 yards per play. So that was a positive. I mentioned the turnover battle. The Giants had one fumble, but it was recovered by them. So they actually won the turnover battle against the Colts. The penalties were down. The Giants had, let me see, I believe 2 penalties. I think it was 2. Let me just double check here. No, I'm sorry. The Giants had 7 penalties. Still, that was down from the double digits that they've had the last, in 2 of the last 4 weeks or so. So that was good. The Giants in the red zone, 2 of 3. Goal to goal, 2 of 2. So just overall, really good quarterback play, really good offensive line play. Drew Lock finished 17 of 23 for 309 yards, 4 touchdowns, including a 59-yarder, which went to Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, by the way, 171 receiving yards. So he is over 1,000, as is Tyrone Tracy Jr., who is over 1,000 scrimmage yards as well. So Malik Neighbors had the 2 touchdowns, and just really, you sit there and you say, where has this been all season long? Because remember, the Giants were playing with a makeshift offensive line, all right? None of the 5 starters who were in the lineup for the Giants at offensive line were the same guys that they had started the season with. But yet they came together and they played well. The defense, they had their moments. Okay. They did allow 33 points. They did allow for the Colts to turn the game into a shootout. There were a couple of costly pass interference calls against Deontay Banks. Kayvon Thibodeau really didn't show up until towards the end of the game when he had the strip sack. So some little things there that you can point to. But overall, a good performance. And let's not forget special teams. Amir Smith-Marset with the 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. This is all stuff. This is what this team is capable of doing when they clean stuff up and they play complementary football. And it's been so long since they have done this. And, look, I say this all the time, folks. It is far easier for me to cover a win than it is a loss. I don't like covering a loss, right? But it's part of the job. And quite frankly, when you constantly have to talk about a loss every single week, and there's only so many ways you could say that the team is not good, this was actually a refreshing drink of water on a hot day, as far as I'm concerned. And look, we'll talk about the draft status in the next segment, because I know a lot of you are saying, why are you so happy? Now this means the Giants aren't going to have the first overall pick. And you guys know me. You know that as far as I'm concerned, that if I get done early on the first night of the draft, which means if the Giants are in the top 10, that means I'm going to get done early. I'm happy because this way I don't have to sit up too late. But again, it's part of the job. Anyway, overall, the Giants with a big win against the Colts. They will wrap up the season next week in Philadelphia, the House of Horrors. Saquon Barkley needs a few more yards, I believe, in order to crack Eric Dickerson's rushing record. And you just know what's going to happen next week. You just know he's going to get it next week against the Giants. And you also probably figure that, there were no planes this weekend over MetLife Stadium because of the weather being so bad and all the planes being grounded. But I would not be surprised if there's some planes flying next week. But still, that being said, a feel-good opportunity for the Giants. A lot of guys who performed and stepped up, and just a refreshing change of pace for, the football team, for the coaches, and for us in the media to cover a win that looked, like a legitimate football team was actually out there. Now, that all being said, the Giants lost some ground on the draft status. We'll talk about that. And at the risk of sounding, I guess controversial for lack of a better term, it's really not that big of a deal. And I'll explain why I say that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services that I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up tomorrow on the Locked On Giants podcast, I am getting with Steve Serby. I promised you that he was coming on the program. So Steve Serby and I spoke on Friday, late Friday afternoon. So that interview will air tomorrow. Steve was fantastic, as he always is, and I think you're going to enjoy that interview. I know I did, so hopefully you will enjoy it as well. Wednesday is New Year's Day, so no show for me on Wednesday. Thursday will be the final crossover show of 2024. That'll be with, I believe, with Louis DiBiase, the co-host of Locked On Eagles. So that'll be Thursday's show, and then Friday's show, topic to be determined. But I will have a show for you on Friday as we continue to wind down the 2024 season. So I hope you will check all that out. All right. The Giants, in winning their game against the Colts, fell from the first slot in the draft to the fourth. Now, I said before in the other segment, for those of you who for weeks have been saying the Giants are tanking, they're tanking, they're tanking. If this doesn't convince you that they're not tanking, then I really don't know what to tell you, because I've told you many times that not a single solitary coach or player in that locker room believes in tanking. I'm just trying to explain that the Giants just were that bad. And it looked like it was tanking, but it really wasn't. So now the Giants are set to draft fourth. And a lot of you are kind of ticked off about it. You're like, what are they doing? They had the first round pick in their hands. All they had to do was lose. Folks, I've told you a million times, no athlete, no coach, no competitor worth their weight in gold is going to purposely lose. I don't care what the circumstances are. You just don't see it. And, you say, well, what does tanking look like? And I go back to a few years ago, when the Eagles, in order to mess the Giants up and keep them out of the playoffs, they tanked by pulling Jalen Hurts out of the lineup and putting in Nate Sudafeld. Right? That's tanking. All right. So anyway, the Giant players, a lot of them were asked about, what would you say to the fans who say, hey, you guys ruined the first round draft pick that you guys had? I think Jermaine Illuminor said it best. All right. Now, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, so I'm going to just paraphrase off of what he said. And basically what he said was, look, we are trying to build up a culture here. We are trying to establish ourselves as winners. Even if we don't always win, we want to take pride in what we do. All right. You don't want to bring young rookies in to a culture that basically is built on tanking or any of that stuff. And, the players in general that we all spoke to, and there were a lot of players in the locker room, which is why I say it makes my life easier when they win. But every player that was asked, they're like, they're not worried about it. They're like, that's for upstairs, meaning the GM, to decide, to figure out what he's going to do. So, look, a lot of people were thinking, okay, the Giants are definitely going to draft Shedeur Sanders with the first round pick or Cam Ward with the first round pick. Folks, that was never, ever a sure thing. I mean, here's the thing, folks, that I'll tell you. While there is no doubt that the Giants need a quarterback, we can all agree on that. What we still need to find out is who's going to be the head coach of this team next year. Is it going to be Dable or is it going to be somebody else? And if it is somebody else, does that person maybe have a different idea as to what they want in a quarterback? Maybe that person says, okay, you know what? I'm not crazy about Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. I want a veteran in here. Make it happen. Make a trade with Atlanta for Kirk Cousins happen. Or go out and sign, Justin Fields in free agency. We don't know that. We're all assuming, or most of us are assuming, that the Giants are going to take one of those two quarterbacks. And, look, there's a very good chance that that happens if they are in a position to do so. But it is not a guarantee, right? And it can't be a guarantee until we know what direction the team is going in as far as their coaching staff goes. All right. Now, speaking of their coaching staff, let's talk about Brian Dable for a moment. Brian Dable, from day one, has spoken about processes and coming to work and doing all the right things. And, eventually it would pay off. And after a while, it was like, okay, 10 in a row you lose. Obviously, your processes aren't working. Something's got to change. Something's got to give. So Brian Dable, although not quite as obvious as what Joe Judge tried to do when he gave an impassioned speech about why he should keep his job, Brian Dable kind of gave his own thoughts in opening up about, where things stood. And he spoke about, how everybody came to work, everybody stayed true to the process. Everybody, he praised the injured guys for going out there and fighting through, whatever it is they were dealing with. So he kind of made a little speech, if you will, to ownership to justify him keeping his job. Now, will he keep his job? I would say probably he helped himself a little bit because it showed today to ownership that there was no quit in this team, that basically, what has happened these last few weeks, these last 10 weeks prior, was just a result of the team just being bad, all right? The talent level being drained and vastly reduced. So you can make that case. Now, I still don't think that Dable has saved himself, but I do think with the win today, he now puts a feather in his cap for when he has to go before ownership to make a case as to why he should stay. He could turn around and he could say, look, see what good quarterback play does? You get me a quarterback that can do, what Drew Lock did today, and I can win you some games. So this is going to be pretty interesting because, John Mara, we all know what he said back in October, how he didn't anticipate making any changes in season and how he didn't think he would have to make any changes in the off season. I still think Joe Schoen is on more solid ground than Brian Dable, but we will see. We will find out in about a week because after that Eagle game is wrapped up, and by the way, I fully expect the Giants to lose that game because, as I've said before, Philadelphia is just a house of horrors for them. And even if the Eagles bench their starters, which I don't think they're going to do because, like I said, Saquon Barkley is going to be looking for that rushing record, single season rushing record. I think the Eagles just have a better team than the Giants. And what I would hope for in that game is that we see the Giants fight. And if they do, great. If they don't, then it's anybody's guess. And our first clue, by the way, folks, as to whether or not the Giants are keeping Schoen and Dable will come on baggy day. Will we hear from both of those guys, or are we going to hear from them, later in the week? Because ownership is thinking about making a change. So I'm sure those discussions are all going on, and we'll find out soon enough. But I do think Shane is going to be safe. Dable, I think, helped himself a little bit this week. I'm not ready though to say that he's definitely going to be back next year. We will have to see how that works out. All right, coming up next, some final thoughts on what was a pretty good day for Giants football, draft status notwithstanding. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And gosh, I can't believe the Giants won. I really can't believe it. I thought maybe they could pull it off, and they did, but I didn't think, it would be in this way. And, I do want to say something just real quick before I get to my final thoughts on today's game. Today, for those of you who weren't following on social media, today was the last day for Tom Canavan, who is 40-year NFL reporter for the Associated Press. One of the first people I met when I first came on the beat. Today was his last game that he was covering. And we kind of had a little send off party, if you will, for him in the press box. And I just want to take a moment to express my appreciation to Tommy, who I consider a very good friend. A lot of times we kid each other. He likes to tease me about stuff. I tease him back. So I just want to send a shout out to him and wish him all the best in retirement. And that now means that Paul Schwartz, I believe, is now the longest tenured Giant beat writer. And anybody want to guess who number 2 is as far as the longest tenured beat writer is? That's right. It's yours truly. So getting up there in age, folks. But I hopefully, God willing, have another 10, 15 years to go before I have to think about retiring. But anyway, let's get back to the Giants' win over the Indianapolis Colts and some final thoughts here. I look at this Giants team, and the one thing that kind of sticks out at me that I have to say I'm most impressed with is how week in and week out, you see guys like Brian Burns, who is absolutely positively hurting. I mean, that guy is dragging himself now out on the field to play and just, play on adrenaline. You see Malik Neighbors, who was dealing with a painful toe injury, go out there and have the kind of performance that he had. Tyrone Tracy, whose ankle sometimes looks like it's got the size of a grapefruit. You see these other guys who are banged up going out there week after week. And again, folks, don't tell me they're tanking, because tanking to me would be, oh, you know what? I'm hurt. Pack it in. I'll see you next year. These guys have character. And, Jermaine Illuminor, I told you about what he said about building a culture. And part of the culture that Brian Dable was looking to build on this team was that smart, tough, competitive culture. Now, talent is one thing. When you lose as many guys as the Giants have had to lose due to injury, that does take its toll. It's not an excuse, but it does take its toll. But that they keep at it, they keep fighting, they keep going out there despite the fact that they are dealing with some significant injuries, that tells you a lot about the character of this team. And again, I don't know what ownership's going to do as far as, Shane and Dable. Again, I think Shane stays. Dable, I'm not so sure. But if nothing else, folks, this Giant team has a solid core of young players mixed in with veterans. And if they could just figure out a way to keep these guys healthy, if they could figure out a better way to clean up some of the sloppiness that still lingers here and there, this team, there's no reason why this team can't turn it around and be decent once it adds a few more pieces. The quarterback, another cornerback, interior defensive line help. the offensive line help, another wide receiver they're going to need. So the Giants, are they trending in the right direction? I'm not going to say that off of one win because that would be foolish. But there are teams that are far worse, I think, than, as far as their state, where they're at right now. And look, whatever happens next week, it is what it is. But I think this win was a much needed drink of water for this Giants team, one that they can build on, if not next week, certainly in the offseason going into next year, even though they're going to have some different faces. So we'll be along for the ride and we'll see what happens. And of course, I will have the wrap up for you next week. We'll also have Baggy Day next week, but I'll get into the schedule for next week a little later on in the week. So, anyway, be sure to tune in tomorrow. Steve Serby is my special guest. Giant fans, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's Locked On Giants podcast. And I hope in some way or shape or form, even if you wanted the Giants to tank and have that number one draft pick, I hope you at least found some enjoyment in the win. I know I did. All right, Giant fans, we'll see you tomorrow with Steve Serby, my special guest. Have a good one.